Ooh, thanks everyone. Welcome back. We had to take a little breather after just experiencing those really rich artworks. I mean, I kind of felt like when we've been installing the show, I've been kind of watching the progress, and it's hypnotizing watching the sculptures just kind of move, and I get really, really, really sucked in. So I really encourage everyone to go check it out.
That was what I was gonna say. That Tiari's work has this very particular, I don't know, like hypnotizing, I don't know, like atmosphere to it. I just can't, I don't know. Like sometimes I would just like keep on watching them and then at some point just wondering if I should move to the next one. So it's like, oh yeah, sure. Okay. There's a lot of other things to go through, so I might as well start moving slowly elsewhere. So yeah, I think that is a, yeah, it's a very powerful, very complete way of tying together topics that are not only urgent but necessarily to rethink and rebuild and reweave. Um, yeah, which I think also connects with what we're gonna experience now.
Yes, yes. And I'm definitely going to be going to bed tonight with the thought of what does it feel like to be a cyanobacteria? So, without further ado, I know we're running a little bit behind schedule today. We just have so much richness for you. Coming up next, I'm really excited to present a talk by Nathan Shaffer. Nathan is a new media artist, author, and special ed teacher from Alaska. He's one of the founding members of the Meme Writer Media Team, which is an art collective founded in 2000 designing early form internet memes, and Manifest.ar, the first international art collective making mobile augmented reality works. Oh, this is so great after we just looked at some augmented reality work. He was profiled by PBS Digital Studios as part of an online collaboration called The Future in 2014, and he's been shown at Noxious Sector Projects, Bowwelt, Bunnell Street Art Center, Rhizome, the ISEA, Pratt Museum, Virtuale Switzerland, Out North Contemporary Art House, and the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston. He also contributed chapters to the first anthology of AR-based art making, Augmented Reality Art, published by Springer in 2014, followed by Augmented Reality Games 2, Augmented Reality in Education, and Augmented Reality in Museums, Tourism, and Heritage. His current work is called Wintermute, and it's an augmented Alaskan comic book, which he's received a Creative Capital Award for just last year. I won't say too much more because I know Nathan's going to talk about it, so I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that, and you can experience just in a few minutes. And I'm also, being over the moon to say that as a surprise, we have curator Patrick Lichty with us, who will be joining the conversation. Afterwards. He is a curator and a collaborator of mine in the past. We're currently working on a show together, actually. And he's a media reality artist, curator, and theorist of over 2 decades who explores how media and mediation affect our perception of reality. He's best known for his work as an artistic director of the virtual reality performance art group Second Front, iconic, Google it, and the animator of the activist group The Yes Men. He's a Cal Arts Herb Alpert Fellow and Whitney Biennial exhibitor as part of the collective RT Mark. He's presented and exhibited internationally in numerous biennials and triennials. There's so many. I'm telling you, Google him. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting Patrick Lichty. And he's a longtime friend of Nathan and one of the collaborators of Manifest.ar as well. Without further ado, here's Nathan, and we'll be back with you afterwards for a brief conversation.
See you in a bit.
Chinungali, my name is Nathan Shaffer. I'm a new media artist, special education teacher, and author from Anchorage, Alaska. I'm participating in the Worlding Protocol show. In the exhibition, this is going to be a talk I'm giving also about collective practice and world building inside of a collective practice. I've been working since I was about 13 or 14 as a kid with collective practices and collective art making and world building, starting with the Dogma 1 laboratories. That was 93, 94. I was in junior high. Me and my friend Isaac Boatwright started it up. It was honestly something closer to just some art nerd kids that were really interested in making art, and we didn't really have much of an education on what it was. We loved European literature and fin de siècle literature. We're really into Dada and surrealism, kind of normal things that art kids would have gotten into, and we started building collaborative stories together. By the time we were young adults in our early 20s, with Joelle Howell, my wife, we founded the Meme Writer Media Team, which that was around 99 or 2000. So that was the first, I think we probably wrote manifestos with the Dogma One laboratories, but it was honestly just mostly kids having fun. And I really can't find a lot of that old stuff. We've just moved around so much. But the Meme Writer Media Team in 99, we were totally mesmerized by this book by Richard Dawkins called The Selfish Gene, where he invented the term memes and memeplexes and memetics to describe things moving between culture the way genetics do. So memes at the time were kind of this culture jamming thing, reality hacking. It was politically motivated, anarchist kind of art making, disrupting the system kind of stuff. We ended up doing lots of really fun things as we were world building. We had all the political stuff, but it started getting way more into science fiction and fantasy elements. The images I have here, this was a screenshot from one of the old websites. I think it was also off of MySpace. And then one of the first actual internet memes. We weren't making internet memes so much as we were doing interactive art and installations and things like that. We had a group inside of our collective called the Manifest Infinity Life Extension Foundation that built cryonic suspension devices. That one also had a manifesto. So, I mean, stuff like here you see, this is called the Brain Freeze. It's a cryonic neurosuspension device that also made ice cream. It was goofy things. Eventually, the Meme Writer Media Team we all started doing our own practice. Joel and I were about to finish grad school. I was doing this project called Novel Pieces, and I was really into this idea of taking artwork or finding artwork that existed only in science fiction novels, just as descriptions, and it didn't exist anywhere else. And so for the displays, it would look like conceptual art where viewers would just read these descriptions and the artwork would kind of exist in these liminal spaces between everything. So this is 2007-ish when I was finishing up that piece, and that's when William Gibson's novel Spook Country came out. And he started talking a lot about locative media, which is something some of us were kind of doing. I wasn't really calling myself a new media artist at this time. I was calling myself a speculative media artist because I was working with things that were right on the periphery of being, let's say, media, not necessarily digital, but this one was Photoshop images of artworks that were described inside of Spook Country uploaded into Google Maps. So before the iPhones were really becoming a big thing, it was still sort of new, and mobile augmented reality apps hadn't launched just yet. They were about to. One of the pieces I made there was Archie, which was one of the first augmented reality projects I actually made with Christopher Manzione, who went to school with us, and he had started something called the Virtual Public Art Project. Eventually, since I was making this kind of stuff, the founder of Manifest AR, Mark Skorak, asked me to join them. And it was Manifest AR is this international collective of mobile augmented reality artists that were all working together. This was one of our group shows called Occupy Mayday. It was all over the world. All these little spots were places where we had shows up. This was coming towards the end of Manifest AR working together. In 2010, they wrote the Manifest AR manifesto, and I signed on to that. It was kind of a fun group to be doing stuff with. We were showing all over the world, all sorts of fun stuff. Everybody was doing little festivals in the areas where they lived. So Unseen Sculptures was in Australia, and Christopher was doing the Virtual Public Art Project. In my neck of the woods in Anchorage, I was doing Wintermoot, and I had really started getting into building narratives, augmented narratives using AR. I was working on a piece called Non-Local. This is just a bunch of science fiction stories uploaded into the Layer app, which is now defunct. There would be sometimes little publications that went with it. It ended up turning into lots of different things. I started working a lot more with these narratives. I built something for the Anchorage Centennial where we had a bunch of four authors write historical fiction set in Anchorage. This one was written by Angela Yatlin Gonzalez, a Koyukon writer about Dena'ina Summerfish Camp. The Dena'ina are the indigenous group in South Central Alaska, Anchorage area where I live. And so we use the augmented reality laid over top of these illustrations. This is one of the first times I actually work with comic books too, but we use the AR to, do the videos and loading the stuff. But one of the cool things we did was we actually used the augmented reality to translate the Dena'ina language into English. So a lot of these words inside here would translate. I'm going to run out of time if I talk about everything. So I'm going to try to get through this. One of the last story in Anchorage Narratives was written by Adima Labello, one of my good friends. He's a Yoruba playwright who had gotten political asylum in Anchorage. So his story was set in 2015. It was about an asylee in Mountain View, Anchorage, which is the most ethnically diverse neighborhood in the United States. And it's this, North Anchorage is kind of this fascinating place. And I live in North Anchorage. I teach in North Anchorage. I graduated from high school in North Anchorage. Just this really interesting place to live and work. Anyway, Adima's first story that he wrote for Anchorage Narratives was actually a Yoruba man and a Gwich'in Athabascan man meet in Mountain View, and they realize they're both scientists, and they decide they want to bring a bunch of megafauna from the Pleistocene era back to life, and they do that, and there's an accident, and they both end up with superpowers they get from these animals, and they don't know what to do, so they decide they're going to become superheroes and fight crime in Mountain View. And this is the first draft of the story Adima wrote, and the Humanities Forum, who was funding the project, wanted an asylee story, so we had to rewrite it and do a whole another set of things. He did something a little more autobiographical, and the illustrations I put with it in the magazine were all census data visualization stuff. Then we used the augments to kind of go with the data visualizations. That story is important because it's going to come back when we start making comic books with the Tluca Cesas, the Fish Head Soup Comics group that I'm working with. But before we get there, inside the exhibition going on in San Francisco right now is 3 augments from the Dirigibles of Denali project that I started with Patrick Lichty in 2014. Ended up bringing in a bunch of other folks, 12, 13, 14 more people on top of that. But the essence of Dirigibles of Denali was there was 3 dome cities that were literally proposed to be built in Alaska shortly after Alaska became a state. So all these Americans and white people were flooding into Alaska, and they were planning a futuristic world in the state. The weather was kind of a hindrance, so they imagined living in these dome cities and traveling via dirigibles or blimps around Alaska. The 3 dome cities were Arctic City, Seward Success, and Denali City. Arctic City wasn't located anywhere specifically. It was just sort of a style created by architect Fry Otto. Seward Success was just supposed to be right north of Anchorage, and Denali City was actually on the foothills in Denali National Park, looking up at the mountain on the Tokasitna River right next to the Tokasitna Glacier. Anyway, I took all the specs for these unbuilt cities and I built them in a 3D environment and then uploaded them as mobile augments where they were supposed to be built. And then I hired a bunch of Alaskan authors to write science fiction set in those cities. And that's what actually started a way bigger world of world building. So there was 7 or 8 books written for this project. We ended up doing a museum show of it in Homer. So we had all these books for sale. I think we only printed 5 or 6 of them. they range in topic and style. This book right here, Dirigibles of Denali, Three Dome Cities, is a historical account of the cities. This is Arctic City, Seward Success, and Denali City, in a history of dome city proposals in Alaska, in the Arctic or the circumpolar north, why people would have built them. There's a lot of odd things that come into play looking at this. One of the big things is that, well, to discuss the cities, I drew a binary to write this essay. And so I looked at transhumanism and literary punk or cyberpunk philosophy and kind of looked at the differences between those two and the idea of building a futuristic world, because those were the thought processes when these cities were built. So transhumanist philosophy saw all these things as a way of moving into a utopia of the future where everybody's got implants and living the perfect kind of life. And then cyberpunk is much more post-apocalyptic, a little darker. But a lot of the people say William Gibson or Timothy Leary or Buckminster Fuller or FM 2030, they all had very different reasons for why they wrote things, and they all had wildly fascinating philosophies that didn't necessarily line up with the reality of the world we live in. Anyway, so this was just one of the books. A lot of it's honestly, it's an artist book. It's not meant to be a big philosophical tome on anything, just sort of a history and then a look at why we were building. But what got super fascinating was in Dirigibles of Denali, the 10 authors that built science fiction stories in the cities. And I just asked 10 Alaskan authors I liked. I didn't tell them to write a story in a specific city. I just told them the ones we had. So Denali City was designed by Mike Gravel, who was senator of Alaska at the time. It was a drape city. It wasn't, or it had clear Teflon drapes on it. So this is what it would have looked like on a river. And the Teflon drapes would have actually made something like a carport, which would have fixed the frost line. Seward Success was an indoor city with a skyscraper, just like a futuristic mall almost. And then Arctic City was definitely the dome city, and it was actually supposed to be a series of dome cities that daisy chained. But the 10 authors all picked their own things, and they started writing these incredible stories. Some of the authors were indigenous, some of them weren't. We created this Facebook group to help everybody appropriately approach some of the materials. And one of the things I really started seeing was that a lot of Alaskans didn't see the dome cities in this colonial context. Like, it wasn't necessarily white people trying to live in the Arctic. It was actually Arctic people using dome cities to preserve a world gone mad from climate change. So there was so much time has passed since those cities were proposed till now that the reality of a dome city didn't actually bring notions of colonialism immediately. What it did was it created almost like an archive or a library sense. A lot of people thought about zoos or ways of preserving the world. Finished that whole project off. A ton of really interesting, fascinating authors were inside of this. And I wrapped the project up. We did the museum show. And I had so many extra things, and everybody really loved working on the project. I just started making a comic book called Wintermoot, which was the same name that I had for the festival, the Augmented Reality Festival I'd put on when I was working with the Manifest AR group. So a couple things. I had never made comic books before. I had kind of like done illustrations or whatever for augments, and I had never actually illustrated something from beginning to end. I didn't really have, say, a drawing style. When I think about drawing styles, I actually spent a lot of time really kind of fussing over it. And inside of Alaskan libraries, there's a lot of indigenous story collections that are all illustrated in a very similar style. George Smart illustrated a lot of them. J. Leslie Buffa illustrated a lot of them. And this sort of style, I didn't imitate it. I just sort of saw this as the Alaska design style. Like if I thought about DC Comics or Image Comics or Marvel Comics, all of them kind of have a house style that you could kind of recognize. And I thought of these illustrations that you find in Alaska libraries as sort of the house style. So that's when I started working on Wintermoot proper in these styles. I had published Wintermoot 1 and Wintermoot 2. They were getting, people seemed to be really interested in them. The response from people was really great. But I had started doing something that I had never done before. And that's almost all the characters were indigenous Alaskans. And when I was putting them together, I was realizing I really wanted to spend a lot of time getting the representation of these cultures in a science fiction, cyberpunk, comic book setting, accurate or not accurate, well done. I wanted it to feel like it was like there was a lot of love and care put into it. So I tried all these different things. In the first character I really came up with, which was like a nominal character from the Dirigibles of Denali project, this superhero named Cloudberry. So I wrote the story Raven for Dirigibles of Denali, had Cloudberry as one of the characters. And then I go to my buddy Holly Nordlum, who's an Inupiat conceptual artist up here. And, inside all the friend groups up here, the artists that get together, there's no secret on what representation of Alaska would look like if it was done well. A lot of white folks were are very hesitant to jump into it because it gets into a lot of cultural appropriation or cultural property issues. Well-meaning artists tend to not want to disrupt that, so they avoid it, which to my way of thinking, avoiding it is similar to not doing it well. If I was going to do a comic book and it had only white characters and it was set in Alaska, it would seem strange to me. So I went to Holly and I gave her all the specs and the stuff for Cloudberry. And she just very honestly told one of her things is she's an expert in Inuit female tattoos, and she gives them and she knows the history and she's well versed in all this and it's part of her practice. So I asked her what kind of tattoos Cloudberry woman would have. And so she actually just tells me quite honestly, like an Inupiat hero wouldn't use the word Cloudberry, she'd call herself Ogpik, which is the Inupiat word for it. And from there, I just started collaborating with her to create this character and did the whole story. And from there, it was the same thing as working with Dirigibles of Denali. I started working with people to create the characters to get a better representation of every one of them. So we would design the characters together. How do we implement the language inside the stories? How do we implement cultural stuff inside the stories? How do we make a science fiction story that's true to a lot of the ways of thinking or the ways of telling stories? And the structure of the stories became a big thing too. So it wasn't, a lot of Alaskan stories are very short in format. They don't really lend to this novelization thing that's so big in American and European storytelling, which is when you look at it, writing a novel is like this really auteur kind of thing where one genius author writes something all by themselves and everybody enjoys that singular thing and it's stretched really long, when a lot of other storytelling traditions are much shorter in format. They don't have the beginning, middle, and end. They don't have the same structures. They kind of end in ways that you wouldn't expect, or they just kind of stop instead of ending, or they change. So the way I decided to go about telling the stories started following a much more nonlinear thing. What became even cooler is one of the authors from Dirigibles of Denali, Richard Perry, came to me and said, I want to start a group and we're all going to make comic books together. And I was like, that sounds super cool. What are you thinking? So we all started working on this stuff together. Eventually, we pulled in Melissa Shaganoff and Demi Maharis, Casey Silver. We created like a nice little group of people that are working, and we started pushing them together. Chickaloonies is the one. Demi Maharis, he's Atna at the Baskin from Chickaloon. Him and Casey made this incredible graphic novel for children set in this fantasy world, Chickaloon. Richard actually took his story from Dirigibles of Denali, and we're turning it into a comic book as we speak. His story was kind of a Sasquatch Yeti story set in Denali City, sort of a post-apocalyptic story. Yetis or Sasquatch are called wild men or hairy men in Alaska. Wintermute 4 is about to come out. I'm over my time, but I do want to show a couple things. So Wintermute 3 I did with Melissa Shaganoff, who's actually Demi's cousin, also Atna from Chickaloon. And one of the super awesome things that we did is the main character, Arit, is Denina Atna, and she's on the autism spectrum. So I had started blending in my life as a special education teacher into these comic books. The group of kids I was working with at the time ended up creating the villain in Wintermute 3. So we published that about a year ago. COVID's kind of taken its toll on the practice, but Wintermute 4 is about to come out. This is some images from Wintermute 4 as they're coming out. And I also started building these indexes inside of the comic books that are work in a lot of augmented styles. For scientific information, this is an index of glaciers, index of space weather. A lot of the characters in the stories have glacier powers or space weather powers. One of the characters, the main character for Wintermute 4 is Anthrome, who has anthropogenic powers, power to control human nature, or man-made things, let's say. We had a few manifestos that came with it. Wintermute 3 had the first shared universe manifesto that Demi wrote inside of it, and 4 is going to have the Fluka Say Sauce, the fish head soup comics, a little description by Melissa on how that works. So those are my collective practices. The Wintermute are all available online or through the Bunnell Street Arts Center space. We also have the Fish Head Soup Comics webpage. Chickaloonies can also be found. Their studio's called 80% Studios. The first book in that series is available too. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, welcome back. That was awesome, Nathan. Oh my gosh, what an amazing history of work that you've gone through. And Patrick, welcome as well. It's so great to have you here. I failed to mention, because I did not realize earlier, that those publications that I read in Nathan's bio earlier, Patrick is also in those books too, which is super cool. So I have so much I wanna ask you about augmented reality and how this plays into everything. But first and foremost, something that is really important, for us, a great area is the acknowledgement that we are an unceded Ramaytush Ohlone territory. And that's something that, for anyone, Indigenous folks included, is hard to navigate. And Nathan, you with real elegance were able to collaborate with the community in a really rich way. And, I think that that's something that we need more of, is really understanding, and initiated kind of interaction between groups. I think that, you were able to support the community and tell their stories in ways that felt really authentic and true to them. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that collaboration and how you were able to form those bridges that really informed how these stories took shape.
Oh, okay. I don't want to take issue with any of the things you said. I agree with the things you said. But that's just not the right way to say it. So it's just friendships. So in friendships, sometimes you initiate doing something together and sometimes they initiate doing something together. And if you don't have a friendship where either one can initiate, you don't have a friendship. And the way these collaborations came about was it was literally just years of kind of talking about some of this stuff. And some of one of the people I talked with, Maya Selenik, is a filmmaker out of Fairbanks, and she was one of the people that helped put Molly of Denali together, which is this incredible kid show on PBS with Athabascan, a Dene girl. And they just do so well by the people, by the culture, by the languages, by the traditions, just all these things. I mean, they go so deep with elder and community knowledge that they get the sky color in certain fall settings in interior Alaska correct to match the village accent of that person that comes from this specific part of Alaska, why they would have a slightly tweaked accent and why they would listen to like a very different kind of fiddle music. It's so well crafted at that level with community involvement. So, but that's the long way of saying there was relationships set in place that were friendships that weren't friendships made for collaborations. They were just friendships. So they naturally were able to flower certain things because you didn't have to work on building that familiar trust with it. It was just literally going to them and say, like, I totally want to do this. How would I do this? And a reverse thing would be, them coming to me that way. And a lot of it, some of them might get mad at me with some of that. I think allyship is important for a lot of people, and I don't particularly care about that thing. That's from my point of view, that's people giving themselves brownie points for something they should have fucking been doing a long time ago anyway. So
it really comes back to, for me, what we were talking about earlier today, which was leading with love and connection and care. That really feels like a protocol and a way forward that, will be able, that will be able to sustain these kinds of really loving relationships between one another. I want to, one thing that I don't think you mentioned in the talk, but which is absolutely amazing, is that not only is this, an output that is a project that you output, but it's also something that you worked with the community to get delivered to every Indigenous school in Alaska, to give kids access to these books and to the AR experiences as well. And I just think that's, so fantastic. Really amazing way to get the word out about these things and to, create, bridge digital divides in lots of ways. Because I know that a lot of these communities are far flung with not great bandwidth, and there's still a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be done to get everybody on the internet. And that's a problem all around the world. And so I'm wondering if you could. Actually, no. I have something else I want to ask you about.
You're about to get me super political on this.
No, I was going to ask you. What, as someone who is working really hard to provide access to these kinds of things to all different kinds of people. I mean, you can go and find these comic books online. You can get the PDFs and you can experience them at home. Anyone can anywhere. And I was wondering, what sorts of how should artists and thinkers and different providers of media be thinking about connection and be thinking about providing access to these different things? And I know that, Patrick, as well, that's something that's really important in a lot of your work, is making your work accessible to all different kinds of audiences. I mean, for instance, with your work Second Front, those were all free public online performances that were really driven by the community there in that world. So yeah, I don't know. I was thinking that could be an interesting place to start.
So for me, before I answer for Patrick, there's still this little anarchist kid who wants to make artwork in me. And part of that is everything should be free. Everything should be open. All the characters in Wintermoot that I design are actually made. We call it Alaskan open source, which means they're free for any child in Alaska to use however they want, as long as they follow some very basic cultural competency guidelines. because cultural competency is a big part of having an open society, or a society where we share with each other. You need to learn competency. On top of that, when to stop talking, when to be a good listener, doer, ancestor, all those things. But at the root of it, for me, there's that little kid that just wants to do something to make sure everybody gets to have it for free.
And I think I don't know. It's I kept on thinking about like actually the I don't know the community is built through peer to peer exchange, and how actually well that is not necessarily just the metaphor of the early internet. It actually comes from outside the screen, and it must come from outside the screen, pour inside the screen in order for it to be reassembled and reshared elsewhere. And I think that something is very very powerful, and it's something that happens within this project. Apart, of course, of the narrative that it holds inside, that I think is very very rich and very powerful, and that needs to I don't know in a way be rebrought into life if it was not living. I don't know. I think there is something that was just like continuously living and growing, and then just I don't know condensed into this project. How do you
I
feel
wish
about
I
that?
had time to show more. Demi Maharis. So the oral storytelling traditions in Alaska are just so long and beautiful and crazy exciting, but also a lot of people outside of Alaska just don't know it. But Demi, with his comic book, he just came up and we released the first one, but him and Casey had a whole storytelling performance that they did with it, where they had this gear they gave, and they gave they're called in Atna, it's called Yana Dia, the legendary stories. And so I'm gonna start crying. Demi's Demi's maternal grandmother was Katie Wade. She was the Yana Dia storyteller of Chickaloon Village, and she started the Yana Dia school in Chickaloon. And Demi's mother, Patricia, was a Yana Dia storyteller, and one of the things she would always tell him was, um, the cultures can archive and preserve stories, but thriving cultures make new stories. And she wrote a Yana Dia story, Tluke, for him. And he turned that into a comic book. He's got all these Atna manga comics he's made of Yana Dia stories. And he created a new Yana Dia story called Tluke Sesas that they performed, where Raven steals these fish eyeballs from a soup. It's like this amazing story. It was the most incredible thing to watch. But this was going to what Doreen was saying, because it was like this huge, crazy, wonderful multimedia experience, and he was just doing it for fun to go with the comic book. But it was a performance that definitely felt like contemporary performance art in our high art world. But it also went back 30,000 years, easy, in that space of time. You saw him touch back to the end of the Younger Dryas when people were telling stories right there. It was just absolutely magical to see that. And then the coolest part of all that is Alaskan kids. When they're like watching us do these things, and watching Demi do that, they're like flipping through it. They're like, Sagani guy, I know who Raven is. I know who Raven is. Or I had a little girl at one of the shows, this Yupik girl, and it was the Ogpik Mars Apple show. And she just kept running around the gallery doing all the poses of the superhero from the comic book. And then she came up to me and she was like, oh, tugging on my shirt. And she's like, nobody's speaking Yupton. And I speak Yupton, which is the Yupik language. And she's like, you need to do a book with Yupton. I was like, yes, I do. And I love you more than anything in this world. You are so incredible. And so those little relationships is what kind of stirred up all the other things. Because it's super basic, competent storytelling is all it is. It takes a little bit longer. The cultural enrichment is completely worth it every time. So for every author or novelist or whoever is making anything, what you're doing is trash until you start working with other people to culturally enrich what it is you're doing. And you're going to get to a point within some of that where you realize you need to stop being the one telling the story. And you need to start initiating a better conversation with yourself and with the rest of the world. And I promise you, even if you want to keep writing novels and whatever, it will be better the more you learn to listen more than you talk. Sorry, and I'm talking a lot, so I'm being a bad example.
No, you know what? The one thing I think that you really make a great point of is like this notion of friendships. You know, in other words, it's the matter of it's like at one time, you know, I was doing work, you know, going up to Adak Island where my father was living for a while, and then he came over to see. There was a project you did. Was it Terminal Glacier? The Exit Glacier terminal project, which was an amazing thing. And it's like, you know, how far did you have to put out cellular, you know, repeaters, like about like 2 miles or something, you know, to get people. In other words, the project was the fact that, you know, the Exit Glacier has been receding for for hundreds of years, and and you know, he had a thing where you'd go out there and look at this thing, and you know, you could see where it was at in 1776 and 2000, that sort of thing. And it was actually heart wrenching and that sort of thing. And then, you know, but out in that time, you know, we spent time and got to, you know, I got to know a few people, and then time out on Adak, you know, really fell in love with the you know, Nungan culture and that sort of thing, and basically studied a lot of, you know, going back to the storytelling, you know, I went and studied, you know, their stories, and just the richness of all that was really, you know, really life changing. I think the thing is that you know, this notion of reworlding, I think, would you agree that maybe the idea of the pandemic changing the social landscape of everything and basically creating new connections, new strata, and that sort of thing, and kind of breaking old ones, you know, might have really made the world much more culturally fertile, you know, for things like Wintermoot. You know, in other words, you know, in other words, like broken apart old structures. So the thing is that, you know, the notion of this idea of the, you know, this shared universe, you know, that Wintermoot is part of, you know, it was made maybe more you know, more feasible by you know, just kind of the old social protocols broken apart, that actually Bruce Sterling kind of said it destroyed science fiction, you know, and turned it into speculative near future speculation.
All right, so what you're saying kind of reminded me.
Yeah.
So I worked with this Unungan, I don't know what you call it, like a raconteur. He's like a
Yeah.
mobile philosopher, David Karabonikoff. But we had a Unungan
Yeah,
elder
our friend in common.
who was helping us
Yes.
write this Unungan story for Wintermoot. So this
Yes.
elder, I'm not using his name because he wants to stay anonymous right now. But so we were meeting at this bookstore, and we were telling him, you know, this is the character we have. And he looked at me, he's like, you know, Unungan, we never invented shoes, so your hero would have to be barefoot. And I was like, knew it. We got it right here. We showed him the picture. He was like, uh-huh. And then he like leaned in and he whispered, even if all the Unungan people die, we will pick somebody and come to them in their dreams, and we will teach them the songs. And it was kind of this like
That's awesome.
the way he was saying it, I can't get the anyway, we were meeting with him to talk about how do we get the best Unungan superhero story out of all this. So we were going through all this stuff, but that was the biggest thing, was the dream, the Unungan notion of dream, and how that related to everything. But it was actually like culturally that the dream was much. But anyway, that's what you made me think of when the Unungan people will never be gone, is what he's basically saying. They're going to live forever. They came from forever. The stories in the back that he was giving. And,
the other thing that I just kind of want to pull out of your head is the idea that you're talking about. You know, I think you and I identify with the anarchist or the trickster and that sort of thing. But the one thing is that the notion between I don't know, the anarchist and the subversive, and the one thing is the idea of, you know, that the notion of the subversive having a negative connotation. I think that's absolutely false. In other words, the idea is that someone, you know, the subversive is someone who who tickles the feet of the existing order to maybe take the Fuller-esque kind of idea of a better solution. And I think that's what you're doing with Wintermoot.
Oh, wow.
Radical sharing creates radical collectiveness. So yeah, yeah.
Very well put. Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's all about, it really connects back to, again, what we're talking about here. Like, what is the protocol? How is it changing? Like, first step is really understanding what the protocol is, the cultural protocol, the political
Mhm.
protocol, the physical protocol. I mean, we're all, constricted by the protocol of gravity, for instance. And once we can understand that and see those borders, then we can think about turning it upside down, and I think that subversion is the next step. There are certain protocols that just flat need to be overturned, that need to be eliminated, and need to be rewritten from the ground up, in ways that take into consideration all of this interconnectedness,
Yeah.
and the values of love, of connection, of friendship. These things, which sound cliche and sound sappy, I think are so important for the success and the survival
Yeah,
of
totally.
our species, in so
Yeah.
many ways.
You know what? Limitation breeds innovation.
That's a good one. I think we're just like hitting the rhymes tonight. That's great.
Yeah, we are. We're riffing.
So,
I think it's a better paradigm, Wade.
Mhm.
Love and kindness, even if it sounds corny to people, they could say that it's the same people say safe spaces are corny and using the correct pronouns are corny. It's okay that they think it's corny. It's not. It's fine. They'll
yeah,
get
fun.
over it. They just need some processing time. And
Absolutely.
I mean, what I thought one thing that was kind of cool is like out in Manifest AR, and there was one piece where we're putting stuff out all over the world, and it's like I think that there was like a big a big logotype of all you need is love's just stuck out over the Ohio River or something like that. In other words, it's just but I mean the idea of these of these imaginaries that these things put forth that are able to take these kind of unexpected unexpected pieces of joy and basically make them give people surprises in unexpected places that change their lives, I think.
So, I mean, that really brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, which was Manifest AR,
Mm-hmm.
which you're both a part of, alongside folks like Timiko Theo. And, you know, it's a really bold statement, that not bold, I'd say, because it's quite reasonable in everything. But I just want to, read a couple lines from the AR Art Manifesto. If you go to manifest-ar.art, I dropped a link in the chat. You can read the full manifesto, which both of you are signing members of. And augmented reality creates coexistent spatial realities in which anything is possible anywhere. The AR future is without boundaries between the real and the virtual. In the AR future, we become the media. Freeing the virtual from a stagnant screen, we transform data into physical, real-time space. And I think, there's so much more, and this is such a beautiful document. But one thing that I think about a lot with augmented reality is kind of and it's kind of the perfect medium to talk about in the context of worlding protocol, because anything is possible with augmented reality. You can change the world any way you want, but it's only viewable through a phone screen or via a projection or via something that may be intangible. And when and if you through augmented reality change a city to be full and fertile when it's really barren, there's still no fruit on the tree to eat. And I'm wondering how and that's really the whole point of worlding protocol. Everything's possible, but we have all these things in the way that constrict and confine and control. And so I don't know, how do you tussle with that tension, or that kind of back and forth between the possible and the impossible, through augmented reality?
so I could answer. I could answer. I've got an answer already. Sorry, Patrick.
No. I'm
So for me specifically, I mean, I didn't own an iPhone until maybe 3 years after I was making augmented reality art. Like, I was very poor for a very long time, but I knew how to make 3D models in code a little bit. I never actually saw my work. It was just kind of this thing that I knew how to do. Uh, that being said, augmented reality was more of a style. So I really like starting with something real and then moving it into another thing. So like all my work, especially from that time, but kind of coming into now a little bit, I would start like with a real world thing, and then I would extrapolate a project from it. So the dome cities that were proposed, I went to that, and then I created a set of fictions from that, augmented it out. So the Exit Glacier project, Exit Glacier was shrinking. I went and created 5 of the Termini at Exit Glacier. It's just all as an aesthetic style. I just really like starting with something like that, a factual thing. Wintermoot Forest starts with a description of dog vomit plasmodia. I really like that. The Wintermoot 3 started with a description of blood snow, which is this cyanobacteria that lives on glaciers that is more pronounced when humans are present and looks like blood. And it's kind of incredible, and it smells like watermelons, and I like that. And from there, we start into a story about a superhero with autism. I don't know. I did so the aesthetics of augmented reality I really liked more than the actual thing. I didn't really care so much about the philosophy of the hyper object and virtual space and this and that. It felt like just watching video art from the 60s or 70s where like they're on camera and they're like, I'm on camera, and it's also the ontology of it was kind of boring to me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I think what's interesting about this is that if you think about Stirling's idea of the death of science fiction, is that and actually part of this is why we started a lot of these stories in the 22nd century was because of Bruce Stirling's call for 22nd century science fiction, because of the fact that you had Blade Runner was in 2019. So in other words, you had all these, science fiction been collapsing into just basically near future protocols, and so which I thought was really fascinating. But on the other hand, is that I like this idea of like a near future proposition, so that's one thing I sort of like about AR. In other words, the idea of sort of saying, rather than saying that there's no actual fruit on the tree, but it's just sort of like saying, but there could be. In other words, so this is where you connect the dots. In other words, the idea of it's almost like a proof of concept. In other words, sort of like saying, guess what? There's a pear on the tree, but there isn't one on there now. It's like, but there could be. It's sort of like making that proposition of saying that that actually brings that notion into a potential of realization.
By giving
And
something a name, you give it power.
yes.
Yeah, well, I was
So
thinking exactly the same. Like how the power of naming something makes it come into life, at least in the I don't know, like the very essence of it, and one way or the other, once that is, I don't know, like inserted or shared with someone else and in their head that becomes something very, very different. They're already constructing a new world from that, their own new world from that. And I don't know, I think that's something that's very powerful. And I think that comes a lot with the oral tradition of sharing, or also literature itself, where in a way I've always found that with the oral tradition, what happens is that no one imagines the same thing as someone else tells you a story. So whatever you're weaving in your head is your own world representation and universe of this whole atmosphere, story, or whatever someone else is sharing with you, which happens also with literature. But once you start sharing a little hints of how this could
yeah,
look like, or how this could work, it starts becoming something else, right? Because it's
yeah,
a point of connection, I suppose.
yeah. The gesture isn't empty; it's an invocation. you know.
Absolutely. I mean, something that, last year's festival, just to shout back to Great Area Festival 2020, the title was Radical Simulation. And that was curated by my colleague and mentor, Kalani Nicole at Transfer Gallery. And that's really what their galleries program has always been about, is this idea of radical simulation. And the whole festival pointed to this idea that by imagining something, it becomes a possibility. By giving something voice and name and space, you make it something that can be real and that can be actualized.
Sure.
And that's also goes back to what Thenmori was talking about earlier this evening, about dreaming being the imperative, and then Tiare talking about her proof of concept work, where the garments are imagined and the materials made possible, even if the garments aren't actually realized. And that's such an important thing to do and to like root practice in. Simply by imagining something, it becomes something that could be. And that is something, and why I asked my question first of all about possible versus impossible is because what I wanted to do was take that idea of radical simulation with worlding protocol and make it a little bit more complicated. Like, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And because there are constrictions in place. And I think that there's a really, I don't have any of the answers here. There's a lot of tension in between what we can and we can't do, because again, we can imagine anything. And that's been something that's really profound. And I think that, it really speaks to me a lot, especially through Wintermoot and through the Dirigibles of Denali series, in that, we have these cities, these beautiful architectural imaginings that could have been, but just weren't quite possible due to all
Yeah.
sorts of protocols that were,
And to me, I think that was always kind of the notion of the multiverse, protocol that was kind of baked into that whole thing. In other words, the idea that is that basically exploring all possible all possible combinations, all possible possibilities. But the thing is but still they are all connected. And I think that was the thing that was always really important.
Oh, they did a really cool job with these, by the way.
Yeah.
Nikki crushed it, because I was completely helpless. I was too busy to do anything. It's just wonderful.
Nathan, what do you think of the idea of the metaphor of not the metaverse but the multiverse, and the idea of that being a connective gesture?
The multiverse?
Yeah. The probabilities.
I'm trying to think of an answer. I'm gonna try.
Sorry,
I have a lot of answers to that.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to pick the one I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I like the idea of a multiverse. A lot of the stuff is kind of fun.
Yeah, I've always
More
thought
time
like,
I spend collaboratively creating stories with people in Alaska, I become less and less interested in some of the tropes in science fiction, because there's actually way better equivalencies for something similar from a completely different point of view. So I think a lot of what the stories I'm coming up with for Wintermoot, so one of them's cultural binaries tends to be this thing that that colonial culture really, really enjoys, this notion of good and evil. So, for example, it was a cold, dark night. I am setting the scene for a story that's involving evil. Cold and dark in Alaska is winter. And it means nothing evil, wrong. It doesn't imply anything other than it's wintertime. The only weird kind of thing would be, say, a warm, dark night. That's a little strange because it's not warm when it's dark. But the notion of evil does come into play, but it's not based on things that are cold and dark. It is the notion in South Central Alaska is the bear in winter. That is evil because it's something out of place. It's out of balance. It's out of sync. If the bear shows up in the village in the middle of winter, that's a chaotic thing. It's an unpredictable thing. So the stories tend to not be this European notion of good and evil and kings and queens, and it's just there's that's one of hundreds, thousands of storytelling ways. And for me, the way multiverse or apocalypses or anything eschatological, um, especially if it involves cultural binaries, just tends to be a very well worn way of telling stories. So, not that I'm making fun of them, but they're brought up inside of Wintermoot as red herrings. Like they literally have no purpose or meaning. They're stabilimenta. They're things spiders make for themselves.
Right, and you know one thing I just want to say real quick is just the matter that I don't want to suggest that I'm saying anything like that. I think that just the conceit is the matter of just hitting perspectives.
Yes.
That's all. And I think I think much more in agreement with you. It's like this notion of hitting perspectives.
Yes. But that being said, I love the idea of a shared universe.
Yes.
A universe, the world building together. That, oh my God, is the funnest. I don't like drawing comic books. I cannot stand illustrating. I can't stand coloring. I kind of like writing a little bit. It is so much work, and I have so much respect for people that do it for a living and make less money than I do teaching, but they're doing what they love. Anyway, I'm off asking. The world building in a shared universe.
Yes.
Oh my God, that's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Creating all this stuff with other people. When we have our Truque Seisas meetings and we all get together and talk about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I was thinking about blah, 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 blah. All these long conversations with people in our group, in our little family, about how we're going to build this huge fantasy world, or what are we doing? That is the best part of all of it. And I am willing to sit down and draw comic books to get to move through that thing. Even though at the end of the day, I feel like it's a waste of my time to sit down and draw like some sort of peasant. Should be.
You know what? When I sit down, I read the comics and that sort of thing. Which I just actually do again and again regularly. It's like everybody is their own. Everybody is a universe.
Mm.
Everybody is a universe.
I think the thing for me that strikes me about the multiverse is, this is related to a quote that Doreen gave earlier about, I want to see a world that has many worlds in it. I think, kind of thing. And the multiverse is a really beautiful concept because unlike the metaverse, which is something that is encompassing of all, the multiverse allows space for different universes to coexist and connect to each other in ways that feel right to them. And sometimes, connection is important, but sometimes separation is important too. And so I think that structurally, architecturally, it seems like a great model. We don't have a ton of time left, but there's one thing I wanted to ask you both, because I know this is a theme that runs through both of your work and your interests. The cyberpunk philosophies that you mentioned, Nathan, are something that, I've noticed really pervade a lot of, myself included. I'm a huge Gibsonite. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of those philosophies and why and how they resonate through your work.
Cyberpunk specifically.
Cyberpunk, transhumanist, it's all of that kind of stuff.
Man, that's another big, long, super intense conversation.
Yeah.
So Wintermoot comes from William Gibson from Neuromancer. That was one of the AIs was Wintermoot, M-U-T-E. If you're from Alaska and somebody says moot, it means people of. It's a suffix that means M-I-U-T. And you see that a lot. So if I said Wintermoot in Alaska, people think I'm saying the people of winter. But as a younger person, I'd explain, no, it's an AI. It's M-U-T-E from Neuromancer. And so it was just kind of this funny thing. But M-O-O-T is in the circumpolar north, it means a gathering. So there's all these different meanings on top of the name. But it has a deep reach to William Gibson's Sprawl trilogy. But cyberpunk for me, the big thing, there's no big thing. literary punk is kind of the stretch for me. It's I don't really care so much for the cyberpunk post-apocalyptic um, white guy that fights the corporations with his tech knowledge kind of stories. Those are fun, and I do enjoy those, but I have no interest in writing those or participating in those. But there's something inside of literary punk that pulls out into a more all-inclusive place. And I've got to say, you actually switched my mind on the multiverse. So now I'm starting to think about that in all sunshine and rainbows.
Mm-hmm.
But cyberpunk's just kind of cool, and I like the aesthetic. And one day I want to have shark skin on my face, and I want to have super smart. My wife just said no to the shark skin on the face. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be old at some point, and I'm gonna want shark skin on my face.
Right. Now,
I'd just take the gills, that would be great.
How awesome would gills be? And honestly, it's that combination between transhumanism and cyberpunk. And there was actually one of the transhumanist philosophers switched from transhumanism to cyberpunk. That was Timothy Leary, and he switched while he was in prison. He was in Folsom County Prison, and he wrote Starseed. And so he went from, he's kind of a fascinating person for that. Super weird. And honestly, transhumanism is an extension of colonialism, and cyberpunk, as dark as it is, wants to fight colonialism. And when you go read cyberpunk literature, they didn't have the language back then. He would have used more of the inclusive language. Any of them would have, if it had been something that was just more part of the consciousness. The one I go back to, Rudy Rucker, is one of my favorite novelists. Yeah. And no, hold on. Am I getting confused here? Wasn't Rudy Rucker? Who was the one that wrote Ringworld?
Niven.
Rudy Rucker's awesome too, by the way.
Yeah.
Hylozoic and all those, the singularity. What was it called? Post-singularity. Those novels are great too. Niven, he started off the Ringworld trilogy, and I was thinking about him because one of the the Ringworld. He started off with the guys like having his birthday party, and he's traveling the world on those moving sidewalks, and he got it backwards. And somebody pointed out that he would have been going backwards in time. So Niven just went in and they fixed the book to be accurate. So it was the books are kind of trash, but like the fact that he went back and fixed something when it was wrong instead of just being like, it's good. That's the thing that's dope about cyberpunk. Like, oh, I got the science wrong. Well, we need to go fix that.
The one thing that my mind has kind of shifted a bit in regards to all of this because of my time in the Asia Minor, West Asian, Middle East, and that sort of thing. Is a couple things. Is that I'm really kind of much more kind of like into Stevenson and the Baroque trilogy. In other words, sort of like these, this sort of like radical revisioning of almost sort of like. Almost like history punk, almost like swashbuckling history punk. But the thing is that going back to the, Stevenson, Sterling Gibson sort of thing. After living in, spending a lot of time in Istanbul and living in the United Arab Emirates and that sort of thing, I could much more see the sort of, the sort of cyberpunk reality actually being between Baku, Istanbul, and Dubai, and maybe Riyadh, and then maybe going down into North Africa and that sort of thing, then beyond, then China and East Asia and that sort of thing. Because of the thing is that I kind of really, after spending time in both areas, I kind of felt that East Asia was too constrained by rules. And being in the Middle East, is that there are very constrained rules, but there are places in which the rules are very squidgy, and and there's all this high tech, and there's money and all these sorts of things. And I could see, like maybe in Al-Quoz, industrial area of Dubai, that there might be, a skin shop, somewhere in one of those things where, they're upgrading the neural net and that sort of thing. And then, and then going up that sort of thing. I mean, I totally now see, in, West Asia, West Central Asia and the Middle East and that sort of thing being a much more fertile, setting for cyberpunk than East Asia.
That's so interesting, Patrick. You guys were just running out of time. I want to thank you both so much for being here. This was amazing, and it's so cool to hear you guys riff about sci-fi together. I love all those books too, and science fiction is just one of those things that speaks to this idea of worlding so well, about imagining different possibilities, and not only imagining possibilities, but also showing us possibilities that we need to avoid. And I think that we see that, I'm thinking of the Neuromancer trilogy specifically, where we see the rise of the mega corporation and the control and the issues that causes. And that feels so prescient right now, especially in this moment in time.
But you know what? I think science fiction is dead. I think it's all near future speculation. So let's dream about the stuff we want to have.
Yeah. That's a great way to close out. Before we go, Nathan and Patrick, do you want to just let us know about any other projects that you have coming up that folks can check out?
Wintermute 4 is about to drop. We're about to have our first trade paperback. So that's issues 1 and 2. Wintermute's going to be out before the end of the year. Our Fish Head Soup comics, we got all the stuff up there. I would totally go pick up a copy of Chickaloonies. That's very new. It's super awesome.
It is.
Mostly book stuff.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. A lot of mine's curatorial stuff. I'm on the board of the Wrong Biennial, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's that my partner Nagin Netasabi and I are with our gallery is doing a piece called "We Don't Fall," which is featuring 30 Iranian designers and artists, and in collaboration with Winona State University on the lands of the Great Sioux Nation, where I'm at here in Winona, Minnesota. And then lastly, I'm also we're part of a project called Techspressionism, which is going to have its annual coming up, opening up with the Wrong Biennial as well at techspressionism.com.
Amazing. And as one final shout out, I'll say that Patrick and I are working on a show at Neem in Cyprus. And that's how we met, really. That's going to be coming out in December. So keep your eye on that space.
I wanted you to say that.
Awesome. Well, you know what, guys? That is a wrap for day 2 of Great Area Festival. Thank you so much for being here, Doreen. It was so fun to share this space with you. I appreciate your voice so much. Patrick and Nathan, thank you so much for being here. We're going to kick off tomorrow morning I think it's at 10 a.m.